Cognitive disorientations are ways that our mind convinces us that something that isn't really true.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Larson. Motivational speaker Amy D is here to tell us how these inaccurate thoughts reinforce negative thinking and or emotions.
Right, yeah, cognitive distortions. So this is when so for example, maybe something goes wrong, you think bad things always happen to me, or everyone's out to get me, or nothing ever goes right for me. That might be an example of a cognitive distortion. And when we're thinking it, we may think that it sounds reasonable, that it sounds like something that could be true, but it isn't true. It's an irrational thought, and it's a pattern of behavior. And a lot of times they pop up unconsciously. So they can also be referred to as unconscious thoughts. So there are tons of these. One is when you, it's called mind filtering. And mind filtering, I think we can especially identify with this. Mind filtering is when you filter out all of the positive stuff and you only think about the negative stuff. So especially when you're in the public eye. So say you do a program and you're really happy with it and your team's really happy with it and Giovanna thinks it went great and you get a lot of good compliments about it. But you get a couple people who write in and say they didn't like the program. What do you focus on? Do you focus on all of the people who really enjoyed it, or do you focus on those couple of comments that didn't go so well? And that's what we end up doing. So, you know, that's mind filtering. Another one is black and white thinking. And black and white thinking it's also called polarized thinking. It's when something is either super great or it's really awful. So it's sort of a way that we have to be perfectionists. If you get an 80% on the test, you're like, it's not good enough because it should have been 100%. Or someone is a saint or someone is a sinner. And you know, there's a gray area in between that. We can have times where we can love our children very much, but we can still be upset with what they do, right? And so you kind of have to find the gray area. It's when we think, oh, I'm a terrible parent, or I'm a really great parent, or I'm, you know, it's, so you can kind of go along with that, black and white thinking. Another one is emotional reasoning. And emotional reasoning is when we believe that our emotions are facts. And of course they're not facts. We can all do that. We can have days where when we don't feel attractive. It doesn't mean that that's true, or we feel stupid, but we right away make that a fact, that because I feel it, it must be true. And they simply aren't true. So do you see where I'm going with this? Do you understand?
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways that we do this. Another one is personalization. Personalization is when we personalize bad events, and when we think we're responsible for an event that goes badly, even if we weren't there, even if we had nothing to do with it. Say our kid is at daycare, super great daycare, being well taken care of, and something happens, there's an accident. And instead of thinking, well, this is what happens sometimes in life, we think, if I had only been with my child, that wouldn't have happened. And we take responsibility for that.
It's like a deep, dark rabbit hole that we seem to send ourselves down.
It is, and I'm glad you said that, because it can be the beginning of a negative loop. That can start this negative thinking, that we can start spiraling down into it. And the problem with it, we all have a little bit of that, but when we let it get away from ourselves, we can kind of start having psychological problems like anxiety or depression. So it's something we really want to grab hold of.
So what is it about humans that, like you mentioned, you get 100, you know, gosh, that was great, loved it, and then 3 bad ones, and yet people will focus on the bad ones?
Right. Well, we've talked before about our negative bias. We have a tendency to have a negative bias as human beings, and it's to protect ourselves. That comes from, you know, evolutionary. We had to be looking around the corner for bad things that might happen. So we have a negative bias. Our brain also has so many things that it has to pay attention to that we look for patterns. So we're really good at developing patterns. And the third thing is that we want explanations. And you know what? Sometimes you don't get an explanation, but we really seek that.
But at the same point in time, it's a choice, right? I mean, I can choose to focus on those 3, or I can choose to focus on the 100. And
yes, it is a choice, and so that's the key to this. The key is to recognize that we all do this. We all have a tendency towards cognitive distortions. And so to identify it and to fight against it, to find evidence that proves that it's not true, and think I can think a different way.
And we'll talk more about how to get us out of that rabbit hole when we come back.
Yeah.